Welcome to a decisions training video discussing endforms. In this video, we are going to discuss the main difference between using forms versus using endforms. We'll also take a brief look at some important points that are going to be noted if you are using endforms, and also an important best practice note. The first thing that we're going to discuss is the main difference between forms and endforms. So to discuss this, I've created a small example that we're going to use with the concept of an online order form sending a confirmation that your order has been completed. So what I've done is I've created two forms, one using a form, one using an end form. The forms themselves look exactly the same. They're just taking in information about the users, providing their order number, a button that they might be able to use to view their order or manage their order, and then close the form. It's the same exact thing built on an end form as well as on a form. So there's nothing really different there. Where I've just built it with both so we can look at the main differences. Now, the first and obvious difference, especially if you have built with many forms before, you'll notice that the end form has significantly less controls to choose from. That is because the main reason to use an end form is meant more as a confirmation at the end of a process, as opposed to a form to be filled out by the user near the beginning or middle of a process. You'll notice that all of the content that I have to choose from inside an end form are all things that are just providing small actions to the user and information to the user, as opposed to text boxes that need to get filled out, things like that. So I can download files, provide a file to this user, they could download it, provide labels to include text, which is what I have in some of these spaces here. Other additional actions like being able to close buttons, send links to the users, view documents, different things like that. Just a lot of different concepts, but things that don't necessarily require or rely on this user doing any of those things to move forward with the process. It's more like extra functionality towards the end user that they could use to view things or navigate somewhere else or something like that, right? So an end form is meant to provide extra actions for a user after the whole rest of the process is completed. Whereas a regular form, on the other hand, has more controls that a user could then, choose things from a drop down, fill out a text box, provide numbers, choose dates, click on other buttons that can initiate other things within my form, right? The regular form has a lot more actions to it. And so that's something that's important to note with the main difference when you're creating these things. Now let's take a look at a flow that I'm going to use to kind of show how they run differently as well. So I have this flow here. I'm going to switch between the two. Right now, I just have a regular form in here with the idea that, let's say there's a bunch of logic here that is being used in the beginning. A user's purchasing something for a Christmas gift or whatever. They complete some online purchase. This is all the initial step logic of them choosing the item, providing their payment, all that kind of stuff happens in the beginning. Then we get their form that says congratulations or thank you for completing your form. Here's your order number, view information if you need to. Then maybe a couple last minute things that the process might need to do to complete your processing, begin shipping the order, that kind of stuff to kick off the rest of your process, right? Now, if I use a regular form here, so I'm going to hit the debugger so that we can run this with a regular form displaying the form that I created, right? We get this thing, hello, thank you for shopping, here's your details, blah, 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 all this stuff. You will notice, if I shrink this down a little bit and slide it out of the way, my flow did all the initial logic, right? Gathering the payment information, all that stuff before it sends the confirmation to the user. And now it stops before it completes the rest of the processing and order shipping and everything that happens here. Because it is not moving forward, since this is a form that is expecting a user to complete this form to move the process forward. Now, this could be a little bad if the use or the purpose of this particular form is to just tell the user, thank you, your information is completed. It'll send you information, it'll ship it to you soon, whatever, all that kind of thing that's displayed here. Now, a user might see this form and say, okay, I'm all done. They close their computer, they turn it off and walk away, or they put their phone away and go do whatever they want to do. They might not either ever come back to this or not come back to this for a few days, expecting their order to be shipped and sent to them shortly, right? And then next thing you know, a week has passed. They haven't received their order that they were hoping to get within a couple days, and now they wonder what happened. And it turns out they needed to click on the close button on this form. And as soon as they clicked on the close button, it kicked off the rest of the process, processed the rest of their order, shipped it to them, and so on and so forth. So something like this, being a regular form, the process does not end or move past that form until it gets completed. And that could be problematic for the certain use cases if it's just meant to be like a confirmation to let the user know, hey, your thing is done, or this process is complete, something like that. Now, if I just replace this really quick with the same thing, but as an end form instead of a form, run it in the debugger, same message pops up. Thank you for shopping with us. We'll send you the confirmation. You'll notice I still have this open, but it already went to the processing and shipping order steps and logic afterwards. So an end form is meant to display this information for the user, but it does not require them to click any buttons or do anything else with the process before it moves on, right? Because it is specifically designed to just confirm to the user that their process is done or that they've reached a certain point in the process, and then allowing the rest of everything else to continue. Now it does not rely on this user before all the rest of this information needs to be completed, right? They can just close their laptop again, walk away from their phones, whatever it is that they use to complete this process. They can walk away with it without ever touching this end form, and the rest of the process can still be completed. They'll receive their order within the next few days, however long the shipping takes, and then they're happy, right? So the idea between a form versus an end form is really how it gets used and how it gets run inside a flow, and that can be very important depending on the use case for what exactly you want to do, right? Again, typically an end form is for confirmation at the end of the process to let a user know that it has been completed, that everything that they have done is all set, all good. They don't need to retry or anything like that. Whereas a form is more to happen beginning, middle of a process for a user to fill out information, provide more information that can get used later on, right? You don't necessarily have to build it like that. I built this as just an informational form, but it's still the way that decisions will run it is it will wait until that form gets completed. And that's very important to note in a real process. Another thing that is going to be important to note is choosing between using forms and end forms when building out your flows. So I already showed the difference where the controls are different between flows and forms, but it's also important to note the option when you're adding them to a flow is a little bit different as well. So you might already be familiar with forms and using the show form option, which is available in favorites in most versions of decisions unless you've removed it. So show form. The other option that you might see often is the pick or create form action as well. You'll see pick or create form, and you can see here there's actually a pick or create end form option as well. And so these are definitely very different in choosing what you want to add to your process. So if I add a pick or create form here, and I go to choose an existing form that I want to add, you'll notice when I look at all the forms to choose from, I will only see from the list of my regular forms in decisions, right? I have some tile actions purchase form, and then I have this order processed form, the one that I used in my previous example, right? I don't see any of my end forms here because those are different types of forms. They do not appear from the pick or create form options, right? So I'm going to choose my order process form here and place that down. My other option, pick or create end form, is the same thing except it will only show me my end forms to choose from. So I'm going to pick existing. I'm going to look at my list, and from my list, I can only choose the end form here to pick. And so I pick my order processed end form, I select pick, and now this is my end form. So I can't choose or alternate between the two when I make choices like this. I only get one or the other. The other thing I want to show within this flow to demonstrate something that's important about the difference between these two forms is about user context. So you see here, I have these two pop-ups, and you'll notice that the message that I have on both of them is going to grab from the current user's details, right? So this first one is a form that I'm going to put right after my form here. It's going to grab the current users from my flow data, current users email, and that's going to display in a pop-up as soon as this form gets completed. Then it's going to hit my end form, and then I have a second pop-up that's exactly the same, only the subject is slightly different. I am still pulling from flow data current user email, and it is now going to appear after my end form. So same information should appear between both when I run this process, but we're going to see how that might be a little bit different. So I'm going to run this in the debugger. We're going to get my form. I'm going to click the button. We'll get my notification in the corner. Current user after the form is jeremy@decisions.com. And then you'll notice from the second pop-up, current user after end form is system, right? Now, this is something that's very important to take note of, especially if you plan on using current user information in your flows when you have end forms. Whenever you run an end form in your process, it changes the user context. So all of this flow data that you can choose from that might be grabbing information about the current user, like the current user's account and email, name, groups, all those things that pulls from the current user when the flow is running, it changes that data to track the system account. And that system account is not one that you're going to be using necessarily in the same way. And so your data can very much be thrown off. You're going to be getting information a little bit differently. You're not going to be able to pull from the information about this user's account anymore. So it's going to be something that you want to be very careful with and making sure that you are taking note of if you plan on using end forms in your process, right? If you have any steps that come after an end form that want to use data from flow data like that, then your options you have to consider either one, making sure that your end form is just coming after any of those steps, right? Which is a better option. You want to have your end form near the end of your processes as much as possible anyway. So you can either make sure that your end form is occurring after these steps, right? So where this pop-up appears, I'm using that current flow data and it's happening after my end form like this. Or if you still really prefer to have your data appearing after the end form for whatever reason that you might have for doing that, where it does need to be after the end form like this, then what you need is some part of your process that can create a variable and hold the data of that current user in a variable that occurs before the end form. And then what you could do is pull from that variable instead of pulling from the flow data. Something simple like using a create data step, or maybe you're grabbing it from a form or something like that. You can pull from that data there. So if I create data to create a user email, this user email can pull from my flow data current user email, right? This is happening before the end form. And now my pop-up can, instead of grabbing from flow data, can grab from that variable. And that should allow me to get that user's information because it is being housed in a variable instead of anything else, right? So you can kind of take note of that whenever you build. If you want to pull from something, you set up a variable ahead of time. Then you can make sure that you're grabbing that information from there and using that variable later on in your process. So make sure that you're watching out for that whenever you use end forms because that user context is always changing. The final note that I want to make is just a quick note about the usage of an end form and where you actually use it in your process. This is just an example that we've seen before in the past with sometimes a user trying to put an end form in certain places to make that message appear to the user and in whatever ways they want to, and then restart the process. And using end forms in loops like these is definitely not a good practice. We do not encourage it. So I just wanted to highlight this concept really quickly. The general idea for using end forms is end forms should be appearing as late as possible in your process. As much as possible, having your end forms appear near the end is the best. And you want your pathway that comes out of your end forms to also be going to the end. So instead of having it run out of this assignment into the end form and back to the assignment, you'd want this to end your process and have some other method to kick off the assignment, right? It's kind of like what I had before. This is kind of like a weird hacky way to do this, but the more often that you do things like this where your end forms are not actually appearing at the end of your process, you're more likely you are to run into problems. Sometimes using it in loops makes this end form try to appear to the system since it creates it and sends it to a system context. It tries to make that end form pop up to the system and actually just completely throws business errors that you cannot, deal with or change or anything like that. You could accidentally get stuck in an infinite loop sometimes, depending on how you built your process, and you want to be careful with that if it's sending it back and forth, since end forms don't require usage or like interaction on the user's part, right? That could cause some issues as well. So we always want to advise, if you are using end forms, have them appear at the end, hence the name, end of your flows as much as possible, and do something else to kick off your process, to restart your process if you need to, instead of looping it in with other things, because it just creates more opportunities for errors and other issues to happen. It's just a general best practice idea that we as decisions want to always impose and help people understand to use. So hopefully that and all of those options that we just discussed give you a really good understanding of how end forms can be used and should be used, and their main differences between being run as opposed to regular forms within decisions.
If you liked this video, please click that subscribe button below to be in the loop about new features and updates in Decisions. Thank you for watching.